Welcome to the first recorded PowerPoint lecture in this class, Film Analysis versus Film Review. I'm going to focus on the 1993 film directed by Kenneth Branagh, Much Ado About Nothing, and I'm also going to give an example from another film that you may be familiar with, Life of Pi. Film reviews are basically written as a journalistic piece appearing in popular press, i.e. the internet, online reviews meant to inform, entertain, and or evaluate, mainly to entertain. Objectively, its main purpose is to tell you what is good and poor about a film, and subjectively, there is definitely an agenda, usually to appeal to proven demographics, to appear cool, to appear edgy, to appear on topic. Reviews may, but will often not offer sustained analysis of the film. They will, however, sometimes give a few examples to justify an evaluation. Film analyses, on the other hand, appear in much different venues, usually scholarly journals. They are to advise and to inform filmmakers, film students, scholars, and to advance the appreciation of a particular film, a filmmaker, a technique, or the history of a group of filmmakers or genres. Their tone, style, and sophistication of vocabulary differ in sophistication, but their primary purpose is to, of course, inform and not necessarily to entertain. They may, but not always will, offer some degree of evaluation of quality based on often rigorous analysis with plenty of examples and lots of development. However, their choice of subject matter and their sustained attention to the film implies a sort of approval of the overall quality of the film. Reviews, for instance, do the following. And again, I am taking examples from a film and reviews that predate most of your time frames. For instance, Roger Ebert of Siskel and Ebert, probably the most famous 20th century film reviewers, if not the most famous film reviewers in all history, basically said this about Much Ado About Nothing. The phrases were, Branagh, the director, sets the pace just the sight of a Marx Brothers movie. Michael Keaton's Dogberry is a, quote, recycled grotesque modeled on Keaton's performance in Beetlejuice. I don't know if you guys remember the film Beetlejuice, made in the early 90s. Some of you will probably remember it or know of it. But actually, if you know the film Beetlejuice, then you probably can picture the character that Keaton plays in Much Ado About Nothing, because they are very similar. And even though they're completely they're to perform similarly, even though they're completely different characters. And Ebert devotes an entire paragraph to explaining his evaluation of Keaton and to the nature of the genre as a comedy. He says it's all about style. Interesting focus on Dogberry. Perhaps too much. More examples of reviews. For instance, you may be familiar with the Journal, the magazine, the Rolling Stone. Quite the hallmark of the genre of rock and roll. Peter Travers knows his audience, for instance. He knows they're edgy, sophisticated, they're purists who are bound to cast a jaded eye on mainstream comedies. Therefore, he spends a few words justifying his evals or doing analysis, but he does get across a general feel for the film. Heaving bosoms and bulging codpieces are the order of the day, but Branagh doesn't know when to stop. The picture is overripe. Okay. Again, I want to try to say that really, reviews are mostly about style. What I expect you to do in your review? Well, yes, style is a major component. However, it is not necessarily all about style. The purpose is also to let people know what they're getting into when they go to see a film. So you are going to be writing to your peers, and you are going to let them know kind of what the movie's about, kind of what the style is, as well as to sort of give them a fun read. All right? And what I have here in the directions, or I literally cut and pasted this from the assignment itself just to give you a preview of what we're going to do. all the details of the film review assignment you can read at your leisure in the actual assignment. But number one, you're going to capture our attention. Number two, you're going to give us a very brief synopsis of the film, not beyond its first conflict of some kind. Number three, you're going to give us a brief context, maybe a little bit about the director's background, maybe about the other films in the sequel. For instance, if you're going to talk about the Marvel films, it would be appropriate to talk about the other films in the sequel and as well as the history of the Marvel franchise. Paragraph 4, critique at least 3 specific elements of the film. I say 3 because that's a good amount to develop the length of the review, which is 500 to 600 words. And remember, you can use plot and themes, which are forever of interest to people. However, you really should throw in at least one technical aspect, if not make your entire review be technical. And you can use any of these listed here. However, why not use and demonstrate your knowledge of Barsom? Okay, and then paragraph 5, discuss the overall recommendation. Give us the bottom line. Okay, should we spend our money to go see the film? Okay, examples of film analyses. In the following slides, I'm going to give you an example of film analyses. This is to prepare you for what lies ahead after our film review experience. And just basically to cover bases on a very major differentiation between the genres of writing in this course. After all, this is the very heart of what Writing 220 is about. It's about learning the different genres of writing about film. And I would say that one of the major differences or the major divides is those kinds of writings about film that are to entertain and those kinds of writings about film that are to inform. Now, this doesn't mean that either has to be poorly written or that either has to be dull or not worth your time, okay? And or superficial, for instance. Film reviews don't necessarily have to be thoroughly superficial just because they're brief, okay? So, for instance, you should strive for excellence in both genres. The clear thesis of a film analysis is very important. Now, remember, because of its venue, it may often use high levels of diction and vocabulary, but here we go. All aspects of the picture, that is Citizen Kane, characterization, structure, and technique, focus on revealing the misguided, unhappy hero hidden behind the mask of greatness. All right, here's something from a sample student paper. This is from a previous analysis of Hero, the character Hero in the film Much Ado About Nothing. By analyzing the portrayal of Hero in this play, we are forced to examine the horror-Madonna dichotomy. They may imply an interpretation with an agenda or an evaluative thrust, but do so systematically with support and textual examples. Okay, remember, every author that writes a review or that writes a film analysis has an agenda. That agenda can be boiled down to their thesis, but sometimes it can be boiled down to other aims. For instance, it can be very complex. They're complex, for instance, the hidden agenda can be to perpetuate their reputation online, to create a following online, to remain popular online. Okay, you get my drift? In the world of scholarly journals, it can be to maintain an excellent reputation, to achieve tenure at a university for excellence in scholarship, and so forth. Okay, what I have on the following slide or two is Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a past film production student who took one of my classes and did a shot-by-shot analysis. And the reason I use his example is that he did this for another film class. This is a shot-by-shot reading of the film. This is actually, it says Branna's collapse, but it's actually Benedict, the character of Benedict's collapse in Act 2, Scene 3. And basically what he did was, there's an important turning point in Act 2 to Act 3, and this is when Benedict changes his mind about the character of Beatrice. He goes from avowed bachelor to heartsick lover. So Benedict has found out that Beatrice may indeed love him, and now, as opposed to saying that he hates all women, he can now be safely in love with Beatrice. So he's still stunned and overwhelmed with excitement. The camera is close to Benedict to emphasize emotion or happiness. And Beatrice, on the other hand, as you can see, is pissed off. This close-up shows an emphasis on anger. It's also showing movement in the background. Of course, I'm not showing you a film clip, so you can't see her moving towards the camera. All right, here is another example. I'm going to depart from Much Ado About Nothing for just a moment and talk about the 2012 Life of Pi by Ong Lee, directed by Ong Lee. This particular example comes from a scholarly online journal called Religions. So this is actually an analysis of religions, but it's also an analysis, as you can see by the title, of CGI, computer-generated imagery, and religious imagination. The nature of this article best reflects the kind of analysis that you would do in your last assignment, the composite research paper. Okay, and this, or it could also be associated with a kind of formalist analysis that you do in assignment 3. So it could either fit into 3 or 4. It isn't purely one or the other. So the point is, in both cases, it is a scholarly analysis. All right, so what this basically does here, I know that you've read it, and you can read this on your own. I'm not going to read it out loud to you, but I wanted to show you this. So take a moment to read it. All right, I'll just say this, that as you know, hint, hint, in YouTube you can speed up the speed of the narration. Important to know. For Ong Lee, last lines, the manufacture of a seamless, aesthetically appealing CGI world was a means of visually affirming the broadly conceived notions of interconnectedness and purpose that he borrowed from Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Jewish mysticism. So it's interesting that Rachel Wagner takes and a technical aspect and analyzes it in terms of its implications for a much broader cultural and institutional thesis. Okay, here's an example. So this particular article contains various illustrations, clips, or stills rather, from the film. Although you could also do clips. Although this particular journal isn't an active digital presence. It is more of a static one. So here's an example of Pi on this floating island that occurs towards the end of part 2 of the Life of Pi. The entire universe resides in that island tree, in the mouth of the boy god Pi, who also temporarily resides there, and in the hands of the cinema god Ong Lee, who, also like Vishnu, weaves the story on screen. Indeed, the immense CGI dream woven throughout the Life of Pi is like the banyan tree, intricately rooted together underground, a living organism that is much more than its individual parts. This theme of interconnectedness shows up throughout the film, linked to the twin symbols of the banyan tree and lotus, and woven into the portrayal of world religions. Linked to the twin symbols of the banyan tree and the lotus, and woven into this portrayal. All right. Here's what I am going to suggest about this. First of all, I apologize for the double sentence at the end of this quotation. And secondly, let me just put it this way. Bottom line is, there is a connection between the CGI medium and the authoring of a book. So just like Yann Martel wrote the book, Ong Lee authored the CGI world, and God is the master and the heart of all religions. And basically what Wagner is doing here is she's trying to make an analogy between the three. Okay, I hope that's clear. All right, so more. We are going to talk about editing more in depth in the next couple of weeks. Unfortunately, we're going to do it only a couple of days before the film review is actually due. I just wanted to make sure that we hit a few high points that you were able to use this if you wanted to talk about editing in your film review. So I'm going to give you a sort of in a nutshell review of editing so you can do so. Okay, the technique of editing is the actual cutting or splicing of two shots together, and the craft of editing is really the ability to join shots and produce a meaning that doesn't exist in either of the shots independently. So there's the technique and then the craft, and the craft is something that is learned over practice. The art of editing is the facilitation of combinations of shots that, quote, take meaning to the next level. So you see, it's a progression from the bare bones to the sophisticated art. All right, so a few terms. Shot, reverse shot, when the camera switches between shots of different characters. When you see, for instance, a conversation between two characters, it's typically filmed as shot, reverse shot. It fools the eye by bringing together two characters on the screen that could have been photographed in completely different locations and times. Sometimes you don't know that these two characters are not even in the same room. Match cuts are those in which shot A and shot B are matched in action, and eyeline match cuts where it joins shot A, a point of view shot, for instance, of a person looking off screen in one direction, and shot B, the person or object that is the object of that gaze. Now, in my discussion of editing in the next few weeks, I am going to show you pictorial examples. Okay, transitions between shots, jump cuts, fade-ins, fade-outs, and dissolves. I am going to show you an example of a dissolve from Much Ado About Nothing. For instance, we have a dissolve. Dissolves occurred, for instance, in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And remember, if you remember that scene at the end of the encounter with Tiresias, remember? Tiresias was the blind prophet who was on the little railroad trailway car, and he was telling them their future, and as they rode into the horizon, we get a dissolve shot of the three people, the three convicts, walking towards us, and so we have a momentary superimposition. So shot B, the three walking towards us, is superimposed, and it gradually appears over shot A, the receding of the rail car into the horizon. Not a complete dissolve, but a double exposure can happen as well, and that's what we have with this next example, as you can see this trick shot. Shot B of Beatrice swinging over shot A of Benedict dancing in the fountain. And they're celebrating the fact that they both discover through eavesdropping that each of the other loves them. They're in love with each other. Continuity versus discontinuity editing. Basically, everything in mainstream Hollywood cinema falls under the category of continuing editing. This is basically seamless or invisible editing, and it seeks to make the transitions between shots as smooth, logical, and unobtrusive as possible. They don't want to call attention to the medium of film itself, whereas discontinuity editing seeks to make those transitions notable and to remind the viewer that they are in the presence of a camera and an editing technician. So you have abrupt changes, out-of-order shots, nonlinear associations, and so forth. So today's films commonly apply both approaches because even the most abrupt changes, shots, and oddness still get our attention. But they don't surprise us that much because let's just say that after more than 100 years of filmmaking, we've all been around the block a few times. All right, the most famous example of discontinuing editing is the example of the sailor scene from the battleship Potemkin. In the next 4 seconds, a montage sequence of 9 separate but overlapping shots shows the sailor smashing the plate twice, first from the right and then second from his left. And it doesn't make sense. There's a definite break in the action. Now, if you are interested in getting a clearer picture of this, all you need to do is go on YouTube and Google Battleship Potemkin sailor plate scene. All right, you know all about composition of a shot and mise-en-scène. The composition of a shot is simply the arrangement of subjects and objects in relationship to each other. They can be symmetrical or asymmetrical. And mise-en-scène is a term taken from the stage, and it can refer to everything, the entirety of the film setting, put before the camera. Now, bottom line is I'm about to wrap this whole thing up. So you can say, yay, all right? But here's the thing. I'm going to show you 3 shots from Much Ado About Nothing in order to illustrate this. Everything that I've been doing in the last couple of slides, illustrating examples of film analyses, actually, more typically, with some development, would be done in film analyses. However, some of what I say, for instance, can be referenced in film reviews, and I'll give you an example in just a minute. So we'll talk about. Okay, so when the titles roll for Much Ado About Nothing, we have symmetry. So I'm going to talk about composition, and from the stills we're going to see. We are introduced through this symmetry, the players, and there are teams, more or less. Team Leonardo and Team Don Pedro. Okay, so we have the women and the men. All right, more or less, the women and the men. And they are symmetrically opposed. And in case you didn't get that, here they are again. Or there's another way to group them, the soldiers and the civilians. And Branagh was very fond, as I pointed out before, of symmetry. Now, this can form some sort of thesis or point that I would make for a film analysis, a sustained analysis. Or it could simply form a couple of sentences I make in describing the director's style. As I say, what is good about Branagh and what is predictable about Branagh's style, and therefore comforting. Or it can be tedious. You know, actually, symmetry in composition can be either or. You see my point? And that, my friends, is the end of that.